Sea Isle 650 and Odessa Richmond Public Auction presents Driving with Zack Spencer. Now, from Driving Television, here's your host, Zack Spencer.
And welcome to this week's show. I'm glad you're with us. We are going to get into electrification of rental cars towards the second half of the show. We have somebody on who has a new company called EcoMoto. It's a way for you to rent an electric car, and it's starting here in Vancouver with just one car, but you have to start somewhere. So we're going to speak to the founder and CEO in just a moment. But we're going to be, for the first part of the show, talking very personally about somebody who is very important in our community of automotive and motorsports and personally. A good friend passed away a couple of weeks ago, Tony Morris. For those that are in the motorsport world that went to Westwood and to Mission, know the name Tony Morris as a fantastic champion race car driver. And also for people who live out in the Port Moody part of the world, you might remember Circuit Tire. Actually, Circuit Tire is still there on the main drag. Oh, that's Tony Morris's shop. And he was so involved in the car business here in Vancouver as well, because as somebody who reviews cars, I got to first meet Tony because he represented Porsche Cars Canada here on all of Western Canada, and put me into my very first Porsche car that I drove. I think it was 1995. So I wanted to bring on board Tony Morris Jr. Now, Tony Morris Jr., I just want to give our deepest sympathies and condolences to you and your family. Your dad was such a great guy, and as a fellow Scotsman, I think we got along well. And he was near and dear to me. So I wish you all the best to you and your family, especially your mom and brother. How's everything going? I know it's very tough.
Yeah. No, it's been tough, but everybody's hanging in there, and I wish I had amazing support and love from everybody out there, and thanks to all those who've sent flowers and cards and emails and phone calls. Definitely very, very much appreciated.
CTV did a nice tribute to your dad, and the hardest part was you are somebody who is also in our world. You're in the automotive industry as well, and you host different kind of car events. You help manage different kind of car fleets for car companies. The cars that I get to test drive, I get them from Tony Morris Jr. You used to get them from his dad. And you had a big event, a charity event out at Mission Raceway that had to go on. As they say, the show must go on the day after your dad passed away. And CTV was there with a camera, which must have been really tricky to do. But you and your brother Mark went around Mission Raceway in your dad's Carrera, his Porsche, sort of to pay tribute to him. That must have been tough to do. It
was, especially being the day after. And I mean, it was. The charity event is ironically, it's for breast cancer. We do it with Regina Chan. It's called Track Day for Charity, and it was our fourth year. And the timing of it was unbelievable. He passed on the 14th, and the event was on the 15th. So it was a tough day, but at the same time, it was we just had this incredible feeling inside of him, his spirit of him being there with us, and I think it was that really carried us through the day. So and CTV just did an amazing piece. It really paid tribute to him, very with a lot of class, and they really told the story very nicely. So
your dad is an icon in the motorsport world. So give us a little bit of a background. He's a Scotsman, and he started racing in the UK and moved to Canada and continued his racing career here. So brag a little bit about Tony Morris Sr. Who was he, for those who don't know, and how important was he to motorsports here, especially in Vancouver?
Yeah, well, I mean, he started his racing career quite young in the UK, racing minis. He was also working for Dunlop as a consultant for them for Formula One World Rally Championship. There's some really cool pictures out there of him with people like Jim Clark. We've got one that you know very well with him with Jackie Stewart.
Two great Scotsmen. There you go.
Two great Scotsmen. So so he was doing that and trying to build a racing career at the same time, and ended up moving over to Canada on behalf of Dunlop, and ended up actually in Calgary. And brought his Mini over with him, and then eventually, after a short period in Calgary, moved out to Vancouver. Brought the Mini and was racing out at Westwood, and got to really build a name there and become an intricate part of the track and of promoting local motorsports, of actually running the track, helping maintain the track, which is where I started driving I think I was probably 4 years old, sitting on his lap at a truck up at Westwood, going around building tire walls and prepping for the big, because back in the day, Westwood hosted some huge races. And he was a big part of promoting those races and helping prepare the track and hosting a lot of the drivers. And of course, through Circuit Tire, getting a lot of the tires for the teams and taking care of their needs while they were in Vancouver. So
so for people who live near where your dad lived or near Circuit Tire, they probably drive by and see it as Circuit Tire today and wonder why it's called Circuit Tire, because Westwood is long gone, right?
Yeah. Well, that was when they originally started. The whole idea was Circuit Tire, Circuit Automotive, and Circuit Frame and Suspension. So it was all based after Westwood, after the Westwood Racing Circuit. That's where the name came from, and of course that was right in the heyday of the track. And now it's a golf course, which is his other love. He's a massive golfer as well. So we're going to have his celebration of life up at Westwood Plateau Golf Course. But he was. Some people called him the god of motorsport in Western Canada because he was a little bit of a Jackie Stewart type of character, with the the Scottish accent, and just he was so open and to everybody across Canada and across North America, and coming out to Western Canada and racing, he was a real centerpiece for that. So. Well,
I started out in the automotive journalism side of things in the early 90s. And Tony Whitney, those who know Tony, of course, was the host of Driver's Seat along with Ted Laternis. Tony, part of the West Coast Club of Auto Journalists, put my name forward as a guy that would be okay to get a Porsche press car to drive. And that's when I first met your dad. And, I don't know how many dozens or maybe hundreds of times your dad would deliver a Porsche to me and go, Zacker, this is a good one. You're going to like this one. This is great, And he was meticulous. I mean, I think he spent more time fawning over the cars than driving them because he just loved to make sure they all look perfect. That was his thing, right?
Yeah, he was. He represented Porsche for over 20 years, and it was his absolute pride and joy. He took care of those cars like his babies, and moved them all across Canada, all the way across Western Canada, of which I helped them as well, and had some amazing.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit of a story. Like your dad would get on a WestJet flight and go to Regina and drive a Porsche all the way back to Vancouver, right?
He'd fly all the way to Winnipeg and drive it all the way back, or any combination of different areas across Western Canada, which included a lot of driving across the prairies and
in the winter. In the
middle of winter, probably one of the best stories I have of that was going and picking up a Boxster and Boxster S, both convertibles, in Calgary in January, and I don't know why they were out there in January, but we had to bring them back to Vancouver. And heading out of Calgary into the abyss of the winter storm, and following him along the highway, and he was gone. There's no way I could keep up with him. He had no fear, and he was so used to driving these cars all over Western Canada that a little bit of snow and rigs all over the place didn't even faze him. So I ended up meeting him somewhere halfway home. But
he told me a story. He had a Porsche Cayenne Turbo. And he was driving across the flattest part of Canada and in the middle of the winter at some ungodly speed because he never stuck to the speed limit and was just plowing through these snowdrifts. He said it was like, it was just like poof, we would go through one and then poof, we would go through another one.
Yeah, we did some amazing things with Porsche. We're very proud of that, including a great trip up to Whitehorse. We spent almost a month up in Whitehorse as well, launching the Cayenne D6 back in 2005.
And I was invited to it, and I couldn't go, so I was disappointed. And you guys sat out on a frozen lake watching the Northern Lights and stuff, right?
Yeah, and we one of the really cool stories is we set up an ice racing track out on the lake, and they'd moved so much snow to make this course that by the next day it had cracked all the ice and the whole thing was completely flooded. Well, Dad and I jumped in one of the Cayennes to go and try the course out. Well, we hadn't seen the other side where it was all cracked and all the water had come up. And sure enough, we come around the corner and we see that it's completely, you don't even know what's under all that water if there's anything. And at that point there, I looked at him and he just put his foot to the floor and drove straight into it. And it was like, It was these massive waves of icy water as we went flying through this area. We've thankfully made it, although covered in ice and water by the time we got to the other side. But that was just the way he was. It was incredible to watch him work. And he also did another incredible drive with Rick By, where they flew journalists in. They did a huge loop all the way up to Whitehorse, around through Alaska, and all the way back down. It was a 2-week drive. They had a group of people come in from Italy as well, and Rick and my dad followed the group of Cayennes in a Cayenne with a trailer behind it as a service vehicle, and had this incredible trip. And I mean, the stories that he told, not only those are just some of them, but were just incredible. I mean, he could just keep a crowd on the edge of their seat with the stories that he had to tell. So.
Well, it's funny because I remember being in San Antonio, Texas for the launch of the 2008 Porsche Cayenne with your dad and Rick By, sitting around having a few beers at the end of the night, and these guys are trading war stories about the racing days and the accidents they had and all of the things. So yeah, a long storied career and just an amazing guy. So when you describe your dad to people as a driver, how do you describe his technique? Because you're a race car driver too. You have a background on that.
Yeah. I started. He got me into racing when I was about 10 years old, into go-karts up at Westwood. He actually. And this was, just a typical story of my father. He quit racing himself so that I could start racing because he knew he couldn't do both. He needed to focus on one or the other, and he wanted to make sure that I had the best opportunity possible.
And it's a very expensive hobby, right?
It is. So he quit racing, and I started go-kart racing, and that went on for about 4 years until he got an opportunity to go racing again, and I was playing hockey at the time, so I actually stopped racing for a little bit before I got into cars, but his driving style was very, very smooth. Him and his teammates for many, many years, Frank Allers, were something to watch up in the Westwood days. They usually connected nose to tail, whether it be in Hondas or in Camaros out on the track. They never left each other. It was like, and Frank won 5 out of 6 championships in the Players GM Series, and my dad was kind of known as the tail gunner. He was back there pushing Frank and watching his back at all times, and not only helped to run the team and put a lot of the sponsorship together, but also they worked incredibly well as teammates, and we got to race together ourselves too. For 2 races, once in the Players GM Series and once in the Honda Series, we got to be teammates, and I like to tell this story because it's quite funny. The Hondas, when we raced together, it worked really well because the way you drive a Honda is basically with reckless abandon. That's the only way to make them go fast. Driving a Camaro is a different story. It's a big, heavy, back in the 80s anyways, big, heavy, low horsepower cars, so you have to drive them very smooth or with a very different style. And we tried to run together in the Camaros. We raced out at Calgary, and we realized after about 2 laps that our driving styles were so different that it wasn't going to work to run together. So we went on our own, and we ended up finishing together during the race, but getting there.
Okay, who was 1-2? So. Who was first and who was second?
He finished 5th and I finished 7th, so
okay.
He beat me. But and the Honda race I beat him, so
okay.
it was 1-1. But what a blast and what an honor getting to race with my dad. And to be honest with you, the final race that he ever did of his career, we raced together at the Vancouver Molson Indy in the SECBC Invitational in a Camaro in one of his Players GM cars together, and as teammates, and we won our class. So that was a really great way for him to finish his racing career. So.
Well, you know what's interesting? In my son's elementary school, in grades 5, 6, and 7, you have to do what's called a heritage fair. You have to find something in the community that you're kind of connected to, and you do a little storyboard, and you put pictures up, and then you have to give a little speech in front of the class and for people that come around to the gymnasium during the big presentation. So I'm talking to son number 2, Charlie, and I said, you know what, maybe you want to do one on Tony Morris about Westwood Racetrack. I guess what's the official name for Westwood?
Yeah, it was Westwood. Yeah, just Westwood Mountain High Racing.
That's what it was. Yeah. So I said, why don't you do one on Westwood? This was like a year and a half ago. So because he knew he was going into grade 5. So when he started grade 5, I said, well, have you thought about your heritage fair? He says, yeah, I want to do it on Tony and I want to do it on Westwood. So we had to do all of this research about the race track because there's not a lot out there, actually. You would think, because Westwood closed before the internet, so there's not a ton of stuff on there. And then, we definitely wanted to have your dad in there, and you, Junior, were great to send all of these great photographs over. And the Heritage Fair people that go around to all of the different schools and grade these, they said nobody has ever done this subject. And that was in May, and your dad passed away just a couple weeks ago. So I'm glad that we kind of personally got to do a little tribute like that. So you know what, Tony Morris Jr., Tony Morris Sr. was an awesome guy. You have a beautiful family, and I just want to pay tribute to him. So thanks for your time.
No, thank you very much, Zach. Really appreciate it.
All right, we're going to turn things, get off the emotional side of things and talk about a good news story now, and we'll come back on Driving with Zack Spencer.
And now, here's another good news story from Odessa Richmond Public Auction.
Mark Bergevin is from Odessa Richmond Public Auto Auction. He's a real auctioneer who really sells these cars literally. They come onto the block, they sell in 60 seconds, and when you drop your vehicle off, that's probably the last time you're going to